All right, we're going to get started now. I've started the recording. All right, with everything we do, it is grounded in our best for all strategies. And obviously today we are working on the educators component. So our agenda for today is we're going to identify PYE exemptions. We're going to talk about updating staffing. I'm going to share a few resources and some next steps. Partial year exemptions, or what we refer to as PYE, are in state board rule. And a partial year exemption is an educator who is employed for a contract of 120 days or less. People who are not employed full-time also are partial year exemption. There are some examples of full-time educators who might be eligible for a partial year exemption under the following circumstances. So if the educator has been on an extended leave and will not meet the 120 days of instruction to students, will not receive an evaluation score, will be considered PYE and should be marked that way in T-Encompass. If an educator transfers to a different school during the school year and will not provide the 120 days of instructions to students, to the same group of students, they should be marked PYE. Or if an educator transfers to a different role. So if a teacher after Christmas becomes an instructional coach or is moved to an administrator's role, they would be PYE and need to be marked in T-Encompass. They will not receive an LOE, but because of that role change, they would be marked PYE. The state board rule includes that these must be marked in our state evaluation system, which is T-Encompass. Educators who are PYE do not receive an evaluation score. They do not receive an LOE for that year. We'll talk about implications from that later. So when you have identified educators as PYE, there are two different ways to set them as PYE in T-Encompass, and we're going to talk about both of those. If you just have a few educators, you can set it from the educator's record. If you have multiple educators, it's going to be easier to use the import wizard. You can do whichever works for you. So if you're doing this in T-Encompass, you're going to use an administrative edit from the educator's page. So you want to ensure you're in the correct academic year, and then you would click the administrative edit button. That pink bar will come up across the top, letting you know you are using an administrative edit, and then the Set PYE button should pop up. You'll click that button. When you do, you will receive a pop-up box. You have to give a reason for why the educator is partial year exemption. So these are some of the options. The contract is of a duration of 120 days or less. Or if the teacher is on extended leave and will not meet the 121-day requirement, they have transferred to a different school or a different role, or they are no longer employed. They've either been terminated, resigned, or retired. Or there is an other. You can click other. When you choose that, you have to finish your administrative edit. So you go down, you have to upload a supporting document. This document can say, the educator was transferred from a third grade teacher to an assistant principal. The educator was on extended maternity leave, didn't make the 120-day requirement, or was just under contract for 120 days. You can also put they resigned on a certain date, just upload whatever evidence you have. And then in the box, you have to describe why you did this historical edit. So your edit could simply be this edit was used to identify the educator as PYE or set their PYE status. You also have to put in your PIN number. There's always that button there in case you forgot your PIN number, and then apply the administrative edit. If you have several teachers, it may be quicker to do this using your import wizard. You go to the administration tab and click on the Import Wizard under Data Management. Under the Evaluation tab, you will have a partial year exemption. That's the spreadsheet that you want to use. You would click Continue. You can upload this spreadsheet either by the district or by an individual school. That's your choice, whatever works for you. Generate your template and click Continue. When you generate a template, the very top is what you'll see first. Check your academic school year again. Make sure you're doing this for the right school year. There is a column that says partial year exemption. Everybody on that column is initially marked no. When you click in that box, a drop down will appear. You click that little down arrow and you would change it to yes. When you do that, in the second picture here, in the partial year exemption reason, that drop down will appear and you can click that. You click the reason. If you click other in the column partial year exemption, there is a place for you to put a note of what that reason was. You will save this file. You don't have to change the name of the file, but save it somewhere where you can find it. I recommend putting them on your desktop. You go back to the Import Wizard under Administration and Data Management. You go back to the same spreadsheet, partial year exemption, click Continue. This time you click at the bottom where it says I already have a template and click Continue again. You will choose your file, click Continue. It's wherever you saved it, you'll find it. You'll go through the validate data and the process data. There will be a report at the end that will tell you if you have any errors or if it'll tell you, 20 records were updated or 20 out of 20 records were updated. Please check that to make sure that everything went as you planned. Studying a teacher's PYA does impact pacing. Information on that can be found in our State Board Policy, excuse me, 5.201. And the number of observations for an educator who received a partial year exemption in the previous year. So if we're looking at pacing for a teacher for 22-23 and they received a partial year exemption for 21-22, their pacing is determined by their LOE in the school year immediately preceding the PYE. So if they had a 3, their pacing will be based on a 3. So this is an example of a teacher. When I look at this teacher's evaluation record for 22-23, I want to know if her pacing is correct. So I can look for 21-22 and see that the teacher was marked as PYE. When I look at her evaluation record, I can see that 21-22 says pending required scores. That's because the educator was marked as PYE. When I look at her year preceding the PYE, 2021, the teacher's LOE was a 4. So when I go to the teacher's 22-23 record, I can see the pacing. The teacher is required 2 instruction, 1 planning, and 1 environment. Based on the teacher's license type of a professional, that is the correct pacing. So that is how you know what the pacing is. You look to the prior year. Had this teacher not generated an LOE in the prior year in 2021, it does not go back to the next year. It has to be the year immediately preceding the PYE. If the teacher had not generated an LOE for 2021, the teacher would require full pacing. So your next steps are to ensure that your partial year exemptions are entered into TN Compass. Now is a good time because now is a time when you will know if someone left in the first semester. If you've hired new teachers for the second semester, more than likely, if they didn't start until January, they are not going to meet that 100 and 21-day requirement, you can go on and mark them PYE. They should still be evaluated. You should still perform observations with those teachers. You also need to update your school staffing at this time to reflect any changes in positions, and to add any recently new hires. So both of those things will also be connected to a PYE, more than likely. And check your school and district staffing to ensure that any new administrators are staffed correctly and have the correct permissions. So if you have a teacher who's become an administrator, you want to be sure that they are staffed, and you're going to want to check their permissions. Resources are on our team website. We have the Evaluation Configurator monthly office hours under our recently released, and our PYE guidance is on the state statute and policy tab. And as always, you can email team questions with any questions that you may have. Our next monthly hours are in February. In February, we're going to talk about making sure that your teachers are meeting pacing, your observations are meeting pacing, and then we have office hours in March and April. That was pretty quick. Stop recording.
All righty.